Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Healthy Business Podcast. I am super excited because I have a wonderful lady called Leigh Howes, and we are going to be talking all things leadership. I've known Leigh for quite a while now, probably a few years, and we really connected. We've got very similar values and how we support businesses as well. So Leigh is a leadership coach for service-based businesses, and she is amazing at what she does. And I wanted to bring her on because I know we're going to have a super rich conversation. So welcome, Leigh.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about this conversation we're about to have.
Oh, me too. And I'm going to dive straight in because I know pre-recording we were talking about this. And I just want to go straight into the question that I ask all of my guests about what a healthy business means to you, because I know you've got a brilliant kind of backstory, and that really kind of plays a huge pillar, I suppose, into how you lead your business, but also help others as well.
Yeah, thank you. I love the question. Firstly, it's something that just really kind of feels and taps into my heart. So I'm excited to start here. So to give some context to like why I feel the way I do, I will share, if I may, a bit of a backstory. So my background is in HR. So I had a successful career, which I absolutely loved for, well over a decade, probably about 15 years. I can't even think about the numbers. And it was only really when I became a mum that for the first time that just my priorities changed. So when I returned after some maternity leave, before I had never been a clock watcher. I was the person probably last in the office of the evening. And then what happened was I found myself, and it kind of like come at me without any warning. I needed to be somewhere else. And at the time I was living in Hertfordshire, commuting down to Surrey. So I just really struggled with kind of what my role in life and work, because I still felt very driven, but just didn't really know where I sat. So that was the first step of like, what does healthy look like for me in that moment? And what happened was, without kind of covering all of the story, I ended up when I became pregnant with my second child, moving away and setting up a business. Now, when I left, I guess for me, healthy at that time would have been, in my head, I had the word freedom, but I hadn't really thought about what does freedom even look and feel like. So I just came out, thought, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to work and have some freedom. And what ended up happening was 2 years into my journey, I was sitting by the side of my youngest's bed in hospital. He'd been taken in by ambulance with pneumonia. And I can remember being on the phone to a client. So at the time, I'd been doing lots of consultancy work. And I know that if I had have said to the client where I was and what was going on, they would have never expected me to take the call. But what I found myself in was this feast or famine situation, which I'm sure many people will resonate with, where it was like, I've had a couple of really good months, but it's been really quiet. Now I don't have the money. So I've got to take this call. And I remember in that moment, almost this paradigm shift of, this is not why you set this business up. You did not set it up so that you couldn't be present in those most important moments. Now, thankfully, he was fine. He came out of hospital. But at that point, I made some decisions and some changes in my business. And what I decided was I was not going to put myself in that situation again. So I threw myself into a network marketing opportunity. And for about a year, it worked really well and the business was growing. And then I found myself working evenings and weekends. So whilst I had some intent with what I had started to build when it comes back to what I thought a healthy business looked like, I didn't want to work evenings and weekends.
Yeah.
And it was only when I was feeling really resentful about doing it that I thought, what on earth? You thought that you had made a decision. And there were just all journeys I think I went on to discover what it was, I guess, healthy looked like. So it was at that time that I met a guy who I'm now actually working alongside, a chap called Phil Jones, and he helped me to almost unravel what was it I was building? What did I want to do? Where did my heart and soul light up? And I think through that self-discovery, I realized some of the work that I wanted to be doing. So I started what I now know is called a mastermind, but at the time there wasn't even mastermind, didn't even exist, I don't think. It was a small group of business owners that I got around a dining room table. And we started doing some work together and I loved it. And then I think we were about 4 months into that journey together when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And for me, this was, again, another profound paradigm shift where, for anyone that's been through any traumatic experience, will resonate. It was dark. It was a tough time. I had to dig really, really deep. But within that, And I am absolutely blessed to be one of the lucky ones that's come out with what I call a dark gift that was given to me. And that is really around perspective. And there were a few lessons that I learned through that. One was the way in which I was working was not still giving me what I needed, albeit I'd started to make the change. The next thing, I was having this conversation yesterday. One of the greatest learnings I had was when I was going through my chemotherapy treatment. What I had done was I started to work differently. So I was blessed. I had critical illness cover, which is always something I'm a massive advocate of, especially for business owners. So I had some flexibility as to how I could work. So what I ended up doing was I had my chemotherapy, and then 10 days after that, I kept my diary clear. So it was free for 10 days. And then I would start to work because I felt better. And what I realized, it was like a light bulb had gone over in my head. I've been conditioned to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And even though I said I wanted freedom when I started, I'm now running a business that still isn't giving me what I thought, because I hadn't really thought about what it was that freedom looked like. So it's back to that question of what's healthy. And it worked really well. So whilst it was a situation that had been forced upon me, it's really where this personal contract comes from, which is some work I do with my clients all the time, which I think really comes to your point about what does healthy look like. It's different to everyone. My version of healthy, which I've learned through the journey, and thankfully I am out the other side, is that firstly, I have to understand what is most important to me. And what I've realized is that can change. And I think that sense checking that along the pathway, because what might have served you 10 years ago doesn't necessarily serve you today. So healthy changes and it evolves. So whilst we are so busy navigating what our business look and feels like, that business has to center with us at its core. And until we get curious about self, and as someone very beautifully on a podcast I was on yesterday talked about connecting with self, then we're never going to understand what healthy looks like. So for me, healthy today means that my business allows me to work part-time. It allows me to work the hours that I want to work. And it allows me to put myself as much as I possibly can first, so that I can show up and be the best version for my clients, for my family. Do I always get it right, Sarah? No. Am I a work in progress? Yes. And the other thing for me is I'm richer for conversations. So the people I hang around with, the space and the environment that I put myself in, the connections that I have, the curiosity I have about people, that means like I'm feeling healthy. So I know that was a very big story to answer the one small question, but it's a big question, right? And I hope it gives you some idea of what I care about. And, you know, at the end of the day, I don't believe in building a business that isn't aligned to what matters most for you. You should not have to make a heap of sacrifice, because otherwise, what's the point? You might as well go and be employed.
I love all of that. And I mean, my listeners will know this is very similar to kind of how I talk and my experience, not from a kind of cancer survivor perspective, but just having those moments where you go, why am I doing this? And, you know, I've had some big lows as well of kind of nearly losing my child at childbirth and, you know, having to learn to walk again. And those are big moments at whatever stage, whatever's going on around you. And I think we're quite similar. Like, you choose how you respond to that. And we're not, sometimes it doesn't go the right way that we hope it will do, but actually there's learnings from that and we can choose to navigate from it. And something that you said in there of we're a work in progress. We are always going to be a work in progress because life changes. Like, we're both mums, our children get older, they have different needs from us. And I think that's okay. Like, I think we get sometimes caught in this box of what success looks like or should look like and what freedom should look like. And this word should, especially in the wonderful world of social media, where we get a filter of what everybody's lives look like. But we're so aligned on this as actually it's so important to build a business in a way that feels good for you and to have those check-in points, because things change and that's okay. In fact, it's the one thing that's constant, isn't it? Is change. So we have to, and I think as business owners and successful business owners, we need to be able to be adaptable. We need to have that element of fluidity that allows us to lead from the front and kind of go, actually, I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm going to learn from them and keep going, rather than kind of shifting back into a, fixed mindset or victim mindset and something like that, because there's so many things we can't control. There's so many things that we can't change, but we can do a lot of things. And this is what I love about what you do and how you help people. And so similar in kind of backgrounds from corporate as well, and learnings from that. But those connections are so important as well. And the conversations of just surrounding yourself by the right people that feel good for you. And I think where you come, a lot of what you've sort of said is that it's got to feel good. It's got to feel good, because otherwise, what's the point? And I think that's so, so important. So obviously, from a leadership perspective, it is about leading your business in a way that feels good for you. And I know you wrote a book very similar to when mine came out actually last year.
We were really similar, weren't we?
Foundations to Lead From. So go and check that book out. It's amazing. But you talk about kind of key pillars like the personal contract and things like that. If people are thinking, kind of going, okay, something's just not feeling right within my business, I'm just not feeling quite aligned and I don't really know why or how to kind of start getting curious, what would you recommend them doing or starting with? Because it can feel quite overwhelming, can't it, when you're your own business owner and you don't have that support around?
Oh, 100%. And only recently, actually, I was talking to a very, very good friend of mine who is in the corporate, she doesn't run a business, she's in the corporate space, and she's been doing some soul searching. And what can feel like a simple exercise to do is actually really quite challenging for all the reasons that you've just said. And that's why, there are people like you and I supporting, because sometimes it can be helpful, can't it, with that objective, fresh eyes and perspective to help peel the onion. But I really want to encourage people to become more curious about self and almost do some self-coaching. So a practice that I find, it's really, really simple. And you hear about journaling a lot. And I think people find the prospect of it, they're not really sure what that looks and feels like. And I simply say to people, you don't have to have a notepad. You don't necessarily, you've got your phone. I've got Voxer, so I use Voxer on my phone, but you can voice note yourself. There's different things you can do. What I encourage people to do is try and almost catch the moment. So I say thoughts become feelings, become behaviors. And I think what can often happen is we move very swiftly when the self-awareness isn't there into behavior. So we're responding to something that we haven't necessarily realized has been triggered by a thought, and that thought becomes a feeling. And what I'm trying to encourage my clients to do is the more self-aware we become, the more aware our subconscious thoughts become more conscious, because we're just looking for them and feeling them. I want them to feel it. And that, I've been working with a client recently, and when we've dived into this, I said, look, I just want you to get yourself a book. Just get yourself a book or use Voxer, whatever you feel more comfortable doing. And when you have a feeling, I just want you to just stop. If you can, I know if you're around people, it might be trickier to do, but just think for a moment, what is that feeling I'm feeling? And where did that feeling just come from? And what is profound, and I know because I've done this work on myself, is that for me, it's about, well, actually, that social post that I was just looking at, or that conversation that I just had, that actually is the thing that made me, it's almost reverse engineering it. I'm looking backwards to go, oh, and the more you start to practice this, the more of a realization you'll learn and the more patterns you'll start to see. So my client's literally only just been doing this in the last couple of weeks, and she said to me today, oh my goodness me, I'm seeing the pattern, and we've put some strategies in place. So I guess back to your point of it, for me, it's about becoming more curious. It's about really starting to self-coach yourself and using whatever tools feel right and proper for you. I'm never one to dictate, oh, you must get a journal, you must journal, because some people don't want to do that. If it's in the moment, just send yourself a Voxer. If you're feeling cross about something, or something's really triggered you, just Voxer yourself or WhatsApp. There's probably various different things, voice memos you can use. The more you write it down and capture it, I think it's one of my clients, Shelley, I always shout her out, Shelley Bosworth, is a mindset coach, and she talks about catch it, challenge it, change it. And I love that, because it takes the thoughts, feelings, behaviors. And I think the more you can practice that, the more it becomes almost a habit. You start to, you'll be like, oh, what's that feeling I'm having right now? It sounds a bit strange if you've never experienced this before, but I urge you to just get started. Does that make sense?
Think it's so important, isn't it? And I think, so many people, probably the same with you, come to us because they want to grow their business. and they want business success, and they're like, I just need this strategy, I just want to know how to do this. But actually, and both of our books very similar on this as well, talk about you as that person that is going to implement that success and actually be the game changer. And how we think, our mindset, how we actually take action is so driven from ourselves.
Yes.
And that, going back to that answer around healthy business, it's about you as well. And this is so many people, is that missing jigsaw piece that they don't want to think about, because it's hard. It is hard, getting curious about ourselves, challenging ourselves, asking those questions of, who do you want to be? How do you want to run your business? That becomes tricky, because we go back into that should mentality of what we think we should be looking at, like what success should look like, and the boundaries we should have, and all that kind of stuff. And it can feel really hard. And working with clients on this stuff is a game changer. It absolutely is a game changer. But it's not necessarily easy. And I think sometimes it's as soon as you start delving into it, it is like peeling that onion, isn't it? Because it's like, there's a layer, then there's another layer. And it is, and that's where, when you were saying about, the journey is work in progress, because we love to learn more about ourselves and how we can have that impact. And that's then what creates the business success.
Absolutely. And to your point,
that strategy,
and your point about the pillars, like if you start to do that work, that then starts to unravel, because you become more conscious of it. So for example, when I said about I didn't realize I didn't want to work evenings and weekends, yet what was happening, I was rocking up of an evening and I was just like, I don't want to be here. Like I can feel the energy draining from me. I show up, no one would have known, but for me, behind the scenes, I was like, this isn't what I want to be doing. And it's acknowledging and accepting that that's okay. Now, we can't always change those things straight away. It might be that we're deep embedded in the thing, but it's the realization, I think, and the acknowledgement of the thing. You can't, until you do that acknowledgement, you can't change it. It's like when you look at the change curve, and it fascinates me how we respond to grief and the way we respond to change. It's the same thing. And I think for anything to be done differently, we firstly have to be aware of it. There is no change without awareness, and it's the awareness or the acceptance that this is how it is. This is what I don't enjoy. So if I don't enjoy it, let's reframe it. What do I enjoy? So when I referred to my friend, one of the things I challenged her to do was just work on this happy list, like really start to think about the things that make you happy. Now that seems like a really simple thing to do, but it's really not. Because some people have not thought about it. And again, it's that consciousness, isn't it, of, well, in this moment, am I happy? Like, am I really truly happy? And it's a surprise really about the things. So what I find is that some people shape their business around what, like I did, I thought it was freedom, and what does freedom actually look like? Well, what are the things that really truly make me happy? Would you know, I was out the other day, what really makes me happy is pottering around a shop with absolutely, I don't need to buy anything, just I'm on my own, I don't need to be anywhere. And I realize when I'm in that moment, God, this makes me happy. And if I'm not doing enough of it, then there are moments of happiness that I'm not prioritizing for myself. And they can be so simple. But again, it's just that level of consciousness. Well, when we're running about here, there and everywhere, we don't give our head the space to think about it. So I think, it's a lot of information there, but I think the more we can become more conscious of how we feel, the more we can intentionally go out of our way to go, right, what is it that I'm looking to build here? And in this moment as well, it's in that present moment, because I think we look too much in the future. And I think that we're not always our happiest moments are when we're present, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's such a big thing. And I think we don't want to get into that place of resentment. We don't want to do that. And that's where that kind of regular check-in becomes really important, of going, well, I might have hit my business goals, my financial goals, but actually I haven't enjoyed it. I haven't been happy. So something still has to change. What needs to change? And just asking those kind of questions can be really, really useful, rather than getting to the end of the year and then it's too hard to change because we haven't had those kind of regular check-ins. It's much easier to tweak and adapt rather than to a complete, tanker ship that we're trying to reroute. It's much harder, isn't it?
And it is the questions, like you say. I'm like obsessed with questions, and I do genuinely believe that I talk about two tools that I think every leader has in their kit that needs to be kept sharp. One is curiosity, and that's curiosity about self, about your business, about how you lead, about any team that you might have, around your space, the peers. Like, just get curious, ask more questions. I genuinely believe that there is magic at the end of a question. Interested is interesting, and the more you discover, the more you can respond. The other one is self-awareness. The more aware we are of ourselves, others, the surroundings, the more we can encourage that, I think we can make a difference. The other one for me, that I've been talking about a lot recently, is personal responsibility. Ownership of. Someone very wise recently said to me, every problem is a leadership problem. And you mentioned earlier about this like victim mentality. It's very easy to fall into that, and I'm all about throw your toys out the pram, have your moment, like definitely lean into the emotion, but it is not probably going to serve you to stay there. So what can you do differently about that situation? And I think that's why curiosity, I just think, is a gift for us all. Like, there's just lovely stuff out there, isn't there, when we get curious and ask more questions.
So true. I did a post recently about rather than saying I can't, reframing that into how can I, and it got so much engagement because it was just, we always say, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, and it's like, okay, well, how could we do it if it's a priority for us, especially? And time is one of those big things that always comes up, isn't it, for people who are juggling lots of things. If you're a mum or if you're caring for people outside of business, we've all got other things going on. So time is one of those things. I can't do that because I haven't got time. So, okay, well, how can we create the time, or how could we reprioritize things that allows you to do something, especially if it comes down to this happiness piece, especially if it comes down to the bit that gives you joy, which should be your business, because that's why you've set it up in the first place.
I love that. I absolutely love that. You're so, honestly, I just could talk to you for hours. When you find like a kindred spirit we're banging the drum about the things that are, I genuinely believe that these things can change. They could change the world. That feels so massive. But if everybody became more curious, more self-aware, took more ownership, wouldn't we be having more connected conversations? Wouldn't we have more impact? I sometimes feel like it's massive. It's so massive. Powerful. That's why I feel like there's a responsibility to make people more aware of the change that they want to see, I guess, in the world. But anyway, that was a deep one. Sorry, went off on a tangent. These
conversations, though, it's why I love doing these. I don't even want to call them interviews. They are conversations. That's why I love having guests on the show, because I don't know where these conversations are going to go, and that's partly what I love about them, and what the listeners say that they enjoy about them as well, is because there are those little golden nuggets. There's just little light bulb moments that when you're trying to create content, we were talking about this before we recorded as well, when you're trying to create content, that can feel hard, but actually when you have a connection or a conversation with somebody that is aligned, there's so much stuff that can come out that you can then use as content. And it's just a different way of thinking about how you can do things in your business, and actually lead from that front, rather than feeling like you're in overwhelm or juggle all the time. And if you are feeling like you're in overwhelm or juggle all the time, then think about some of the things that he's spoken about. Look at some of the things that we can get curious about, the self-responsibility, not even self-development necessarily, because you've probably got all the tools that you need. It's just about applying them in a way that feels good for you, and not having that comparisonitis about what we feel like we should be doing. And I think we're both quite aligned in this as well. And I know a lot of my listeners are more slightly introverted, and you don't need to be shouting, being the loudest person in the world, because quite often, and I found this, is that actually those people are probably covering something, whereas the ones who are just cracking on and getting on with things, actually leading with integrity, are having the real changes, the real conversations, the real connections. And that's a much richer, and for me, much more fulfilling place to be than putting something as a mask onto the social media world.
And I think even more important, like you say, if you're introverted, that knowledge of self is actually even more critical, because you have to protect and honor the way that you like recharge your batteries, as an example, because otherwise in the should world you keep going and you keep going and you keep going, and actually you're depleted, because the way that you operate is potentially going to be different to the person that may be sitting next to you doing the exact same thing in their business, and you're busy watching them feeling like you should, and you're not comparing apples with apples. And I think that's, you know, that is the challenge with the social media space, isn't it? Because what we're seeing around us, it's having the courage to step back and go, actually, I'm going to be true to myself. And I can only be true to myself when I know who myself is. And I think sometimes we've been chasing everybody else and all the shoulds. We lose ourselves within that. And I think that's, I mean, it's important for everyone, but I think very important for those that might be more introverted, for sure.
And it comes back to that confidence, I suppose, doesn't it? If, when you kind of have that self-awareness, having the confidence to then be yourself as an introverted leader, that actually that is okay. It's okay because there's a whole load of people that are in that space and craving that space and looking for somebody like you, whatever niche or industry you're working on. You know, it always comes back to connection, and people buy from people, and having that real human value piece is so important, I think.
Yeah. And leveraging your strengths. I'm a strengths coach as well. And I think that sort of was when my sort of, I guess my spark of self-awareness became even more apparent, because I think really what I want to do is be able to help people, if they know what they love to do, what they're passionate about. That's not about us saying, well, we've got some of these areas that might be performance risks over here, but I'm just be mindful of those. Where can we leverage your strengths? So an example was, I've got a client who, you know, building relations, she's a wonderful human and is brilliant at what she does, and she has great connection with people, but she doesn't really like the small talk. And therefore, when she was looking at how is she going to build her business, networking in the traditional sense wasn't necessarily going to suit her. But what she is really great at is holding space and hosting. So we were having a conversation, well, instead of you being the person that takes part in a networking event, why don't you be the person that hosts the event? Because even though you are introverted, hosting and holding space, you're cool with that. And that's leveraging a strength rather than going, well, I don't enjoy the small talk. So do we just keep battling and having to do that thing? And I think it's just understanding. Sometimes we do, don't we? We have to navigate it, and we have to just, you know, get on with it. And other times we're like, well, actually, why don't I try it this way? And that again comes back to your question right at the beginning. What's healthy for me? What's healthy that's going to be the right way for me to show up as a leader in my business? What does that look like? How do I want to feel? And I think that sense check is just critical on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. Just checking with yourself. Have a review with yourself like you would do with a member of your team, and just see how you're getting on.
It is one of the most important questions to kind of sense check yourself with, I think, isn't it? Of just, you know, where are you at? What needs to change? Does anything need to change? And how do I go about doing that? Really, really simple questions. In fact, use those as a journaling prompt if that's useful, because it's just, it is hard. But it's not to say that you can't have a business that is filled with joy and that gets to feel easy when you start putting these things in place. I mean, you were saying, you know, you work part-time hours, and moving away, it was one of them when you said, you know, moving away from that conditioning of 9 till 5. That was the biggest thing I struggled with when I left the corporate world, of just, I felt like I needed to be sat in front of a desk 9 till 5. And I'm like, well, why? This feels really awkward. And I just couldn't understand why I wasn't feeling into my business in the way that I wanted to, until someone said, well, you are literally working the same way as you were. You're just not surrounded by people. And I was like, oh yeah. And it's such an obvious one, I know, kind of in hindsight, but actually when you're in that situation, you've got to think about what works for you and why you've set it up. And as you're scaling, things are going to change as well. You know, we've talked a lot about kind of startups and kind of growing and having that sense check. But as you start growing, as you start scaling your business and start, you know, maybe having team members, and, you know, got to think about how you integrate that in there as well. And that, so much of the success of that comes from your self-awareness as to what your strengths are and what you need support on, because
100%,
you want to employ somebody or have support of someone who is exactly the same as you, because they bring a different skill set.
And it's communicating. So a lot of the clients that I'm working with in my mastermind, they're at that scaling stage and having those conversations. And one of the things, a question came up in a mastermind that I'm in recently, where they were asking about what tools should we use to communicate with my team. And what became apparent was that we end up trying to micromanage rather than empower the team to be able to make decisions. Do we really care like what they're doing, the intricate detail of the task that they're doing, or do we care more about the output and the objective and the metric? So, you know, what is it that we want that person to be able to deliver on? How they get there? Let's empower them to be able to make those decisions for themselves. And what I've realized, that even, you know, I'm sure you're the same, if you've come from a corporate background or any background that means you have led teams before, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy for you to do it within your own business, because you've got this personal emotional attachment to it. There's lots of almost relearning to do again, because there's probably some corporate conditioning. And I think that is another leadership journey that we go on. So we almost have this self-leadership journey that we go on as we're starting. And then as we start to then bring a team member in, we've got to start letting go. We've got to start, how do we communicate? How do we develop that person? What does that even look like? There's all of this. It's such a journey of leadership, I think, as we evolve along the way.
And I think it's, you know, we're dealing with humans, that everyone's got different things going on in their lives. And, you know, I love working with people in my team who, you know, have a similar outlook, that they want the flexibility, they want to be able to run things in their own way, but it doesn't mean that's at the expense of getting results. And I think it's just, as you say, that communication piece is so important, and navigating that is different to doing that in a corporate space where you have set hours or more set hours. But having those processes and all of the kind of other stuff that goes around with scaling is really important. What would you say your biggest learning has been as you've kind of grown and scaled to where you are at the moment, from a leadership or a personal journey perspective?
Oh, a big question. There's been so many. I laughed yesterday when I was saying, I feel like I was put on this earth to do things wrong so that my clients don't have to. That's what I think. Honestly, I'm like, just put me in the situation, I'll screw it up for you, and then you never lead to learn. So that's why when I say, I laugh about it, but I think there's been a series of learnings throughout. And I think the biggest one, I mean, listen, there's so many, but probably the one that served me is my journey with cancer and the perspective. And I think the people I help, the way in which I help them, the perspective that I bring, I don't think I would have bought before, despite all of my experience, despite all of the journey that I had been on. I honestly think that journey, which is just, when I even just thinking about that now, something I was reading recently that said about post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
And I really believe in it. And I honestly think that's what's happened for me. So I would never want to say, like, you know, thank goodness I went through it, because I wouldn't ever want to go through that again. But I definitely have grown and learned a ton. And that learning, I think, is more about understanding myself. And I think that I will not, like, my boundaries are really important now. And even, I know we were talking about before we came on, sometimes even knowing that knowledge, they can get a little bit frayed at the edges, and you can, and that's that sense check. So probably for me, that learning is just learning what's most important to me, ensuring that I sense check exactly how that needs to look and feel, accepting that it's not always going to be perfect. I say I have a default setting, this is how I like to work, and some months it won't always look like that, and I'm okay. But it means that I go back to what that default setting is. And just being able to have the ripple, because what I think the learnings that I had means that I can then pass that to other people and gift them that perspective of looking at things differently. So yeah, that's probably the biggest learning, which I didn't set out to obviously have.
And you know, not everyone is going to have those big moments in their life. So I guess use this now as that kind of invitation to go get that self perspective, go ask yourself those curious questions, because we don't want to wait until things do come crashing down. You know, I've seen a lot of people that have really struggled with burnout, or, you know, through the pandemic where they were forced to make some changes. Now we're in a space where we have a little bit more freedom and that fluidity. And I think now is the time to really get super curious about how you want to live your life and how your business allows you to do that, because they are intrinsic as business owners, and creating the time, the space to ask yourself those questions is really, really key.
Yeah, I always say, make sure you fix your roof before it rains.
Yeah.
And I think that, we, like you say, if you leave it to people, often will say, I totally agree with you, and I see it around me.
Yeah.
I haven't got time. I haven't got time to do that thing. And I'm like, I promise you this, you haven't got time to be unwell. And if you carry on, you can't sustain that what you're doing right now, it's not sustainable. And I think running your business, I think it can, if you allow it to, it can take an awful lot out of you. And it's much harder. I would say if you've fallen down the pothole, it's far harder to get out. If you know that the pothole's coming and you're very aware of some of the things that may cause you to fall into the pothole, then you have some strategies and your tools to navigate your way around it. But it starts from that place of curiosity and awareness, like that. That's why I think they are just so important, because healthy business is paramount. Why did you do this? Well, you didn't set it up to be feeling frazzled and tired all of the time. So what can you do about that to change that?
I love that. We could talk about this for ages, but I feel like this is probably a good place to round it up. Oh, I've loved having you and just chatting generally about different leadership pieces. And I think, there is a misconception probably that leadership is a corporate word, but actually that self-leadership, that self-awareness, the curiosity is really where it's rooted, and it's so important, and actually is probably the biggest game changer that you will create for the success of your business. So thank you, Leigh, for coming and joining me on the show. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Oh, I am over on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. Just look for Leigh Howes. I think on Instagram it's Leigh A. Howes. And you can go to my website as well. So that's leighhowes.com. So
amazing.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm richer for the conversation. So thank you so much.
Oh, the brilliance of connections and conversation. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the show, and I will see you on the next episode. Thanks again, Leigh, for joining me.
Thank you.